and welcome to a brand new episode of Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. Today's guest is someone I have absolutely loved listening to and watching over the last few years. She's really articulate in the way that she talks about different topics and situations. She's an advocate for all people. She's a DJ, she's a presenter. She's just brilliant, and she's a mum of two as well. And she's the first guest ever to bring snacks into the studio. It's Ashley James.
Firstly, I love the intro, but the snack thing. Honestly, I get so hungry and it comes on me straight away.
Really?
It's, you know, that sort of pregnancy hunger lots of people get. I have that with breastfeeding, and I didn't have it first time round, but this time it's savage.
I used to love, so I think it was only my third baby, the pregnancy biscuits, the cookies. And I used to be like, the breastfeeding ones.
Yeah.
I used to be like, I need these actually, because it's like a $5 a day, but for a breastfeeding mum, I need them because it will help me. And in every single way, with my hunger, with my milk supply, it's great.
I mean, mine is just literally any food near me. I don't care if it's healthy. I don't care if it's not healthy. It's very healthy today. It's fruit. But what was that advert where it's like, you're not you if you're hungry. That's me. If the hunger comes on, it's just better for everyone if I've got a snack.
It's good. It's like a sense of self-awareness. Like, what do you need to be the best you? A snack.
Yeah. Same as my son, actually. He gets real bad hunger.
Really?
Like, the only time he has proper toddler meltdowns, we're like, he's hungry. And you just have to bring out anything. Pouch.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Anything. My I don't know if it's a boy thing, but I think kids are like that. I know my sister had to set timings, actually. She had to set alarms during COVID to let her know when her child is allowed a snack, because Summer Rae would get us, like, she'd constantly be asking for snacks. And Georgie was like, I tell you what, I'm going to set an alarm clock for 11 o'clock, and that's when you're getting your snack. But my kids, if they come home from school and they're not fed within the next 5 minutes, it's literally like it's trying to just keep them constantly away from the cupboard drawer, you know, the snack drawer. It's awful. So, yeah, I think that is something that really does run through all of us. We need that supply. How are you feeling?
Do you know what? I feel good. Yeah. I feel excited. It's my first time doing a podcast since having Ada.
Oh, and how has it been being back? Because you've done gigs and stuff.
Yeah, so I've been doing DJ gigs. I've done Steph's Packed Lunch. I've just been back pretty much from straight away, and it's been really lovely. I think it's a very personal choice for everyone. But for me, I did my like kind of newborn year with Alfie in lockdown. So I just couldn't wait to experience everything on the other side of lockdown. So I've almost gone back really, really, really quickly. But I've loved it because Ada comes everywhere with me. Obviously, she's here watching today. And yeah, I love it. I think she's 4 months now. And at 4 months, Alfie had only just met my parents.
Gosh.
So it's very, very different. It's stressful. It's like there's a lot of juggling and but I love it. It's great.
And I wonder if that has also made you do things differently, in the sense that I always feel like subsequent children, people are constantly going, I'm going to pull up the drawbridge this time, and I'm not going to have people over when it's the newborn stage, you know, because that influx of visitors can be so overwhelming. But actually, because it would have just been you guys with Alfie, has it been different in terms of like having as many people over, whoever wants to come, just there, you know, not waiting to kind of settle, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. And I think loneliness was a big part of my newborn experience the first time round. And I missed my friends, I missed my family, I missed my work, I missed DJing. And then when we were finally let out, everything was very overwhelming to try and do it all of a sudden. And I think becoming a mum is so hard for everyone, but in that lockdown time, everyone's life changed in lockdown, and then everyone's life changed as a mum. And it was almost this, I didn't recognise myself when I came out of lockdown, and I couldn't quite figure out if it was like some kind of PTSD from lockdown or if it was postnatal depression or just kind of like a lethal combination of the two.
Yeah.
And I like compounded that with so much guilt because, you think people have it worse than you, why? And that, all of that combined just sent me into a really dark place. So this time I loved it. I had Alfie, my son, came to visit on the day with my in-laws who I love. And yeah, I just had like company as much as possible. And, Ada's been in TV studios and now she's here and she's been into Ministry of Sound for my DJ gig. So she's been up and down the country and abroad, and it's been amazing to kind of have those two very contrasting experiences.
Yeah, being able to enjoy it in a very different way.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And because of lockdown, I guess you wouldn't know how that would have affected you anyway, like either lockdown or becoming a new mum, so it's such an odd, I feel like we're so quick to forget actually what that period was like.
Do you know what? It's funny because I remember when I was pregnant, and then when I had Alfie, everyone kept saying, I feel so sorry for new mums. Like, they're having to do this in lockdown. And I didn't know any different. Yeah. So I was like, oh, it's actually quite nice. It gave me something really positive to focus on during what was quite a scary time and quite an isolating time. So I was like, oh no, this was amazing. I feel really lucky that I'm doing it in lockdown. And actually, it was only, I think, when we came out of lockdown that everyone else's life went quite quickly back to a sort of semi-normal. And I just didn't recognise my life at all. And, I used to DJ around the world with my best friend, and suddenly she kind of went back to that life. But I couldn't really even leave my son because he was still breastfeeding and wouldn't take a bottle. And I think just that shift, I really, really, really struggled. And it kind of made me like think, have I done the right thing? Maybe I shouldn't have had a baby. And then I'd feel awful because obviously you love this little thing to death, but I just mourned my old life. Yeah. And I think now, sure, there's elements of my old life that I miss, but it feels like a very different chapter, and I can appreciate all the beautiful parts of this chapter. Yeah. So it's a little bit like when you leave university or, wherever, school, whatever it might be, that you kind of like, okay, well, that was fun, but on to the next. Whereas I think I've always found it really hard I didn't want to leave uni. I was like, oh my God, no, I have to be an adult for the rest of my life. How boring.
But it's that thing, isn't it? If you were to always stay where you were, like uni, like school, everyone else is changing. Everyone else is moving away. Yeah. Everyone else's lives continue. So if you were to ever stay in that one spot, it would never be the same experience for that, that duration. Yeah. It's a very weird thing. And actually, I know that a lot of people, when we talk about COVID, I'm sure some people are like, can we stop talking about it? I feel like I haven't talked about it. So it's enough time away for us to actually reference it. Because if we don't, we're going to all be carrying around this stuff and not have actually processed what we went through and actually validate what has happened since and how we feel.
And it is crazy because I feel like it feels like no time has passed, but so much has changed. Yeah. Like I remember even in COVID watching films and it looked weird that people were like hugging and kissing. Yeah. And I remember being like, the old life was so weird. What are people doing? And now it's just normal again, isn't it? Yeah. It's so interesting. But then I always think for that period of time, I mean, people who were already people who were already parents had it tough because they had to homeschool. Yeah. People who were new mums had it tough because they couldn't necessarily enjoy their maternity leave or what they expected that new mum bubble was going to be like.
That would have been there.
Help, new friends, meeting other mums, meeting other parents. Then you have like teenagers or people at university. I feel like everyone was sort of robbed of this time. Yeah. But nobody really talks about it.
Yeah.
And absolutely. I'll never know how much was lockdown and how much was becoming a mum. And I also had quite a traumatic birth. And I think doing it all again with Ada has actually been very healing because it's made me realise that actually my feelings were really valid. It was really tough the first time round. And it wasn't necessarily that I did anything wrong or, that I was being pathetic, because that's the thing in my mind. I've always prided myself on like having a high pain threshold, so I'll be fine in birth because I've run marathons, or lack of sleep. I was like, I'll be fine because I'm a DJ, so I'm used to the lack of sleep. I'll be fine. And then when I started to really struggle with all of it, I felt pathetic. I was like, people have it worse than you. Like, you should be able to do this. You're being weak-willed. You're being pessimistic. And I really dug myself down. Yeah. Whereas this time, Ada, she's a very different baby, but it was also, the whole thing has been a completely different experience. And it's been amazing. And actually, I want to give like new mum Ashley a bit of a hug, because I'm like, it actually was really hard.
Yeah.
And you did okay.
Yeah, and that's I think when people listen to conversations about motherhood, even if they're 20 years out of that experience, and they listen to an experience that was similar to their own, and they feel like connected and they can relate. I think you can even heal years after, and I love that. That's why I think it's so important that those conversations are being had and out there.
Have you heard this thing about flamingos when they become mums?
No.
I love this idea. I think about it all the time. So when a flamingo becomes a parent, they lose their pink. And it takes a few years for their pink to come back. And they say because they give so much of themselves to their babies that they lose their pink for a while. And I think that represents a lot of new mums' journeys really well. So I like to think that I'm only just starting to find my pink again now that Alf's 2.5. And yeah, isn't that amazing?
That makes me really emotional.
Yeah, you do look really emotional. I always think about it now. I'm like, it's like a flamingo. They give everything, that they lose their colour. And I do see it. I see it with so many of my like friends who become mums. And I think, you know, it's almost like we're not allowed to talk about it. And that's what makes me sad. If you have a bad birth, it's like, don't scare pregnant people. And of course, don't scare pregnant people. But where do we have a space to be like, I found that really hard. And I know I'm not the first person to have a baby. And I know that I should have expected sleepless nights, but I didn't quite understand sleep deprivation to the point that it's like, I used to think, oh, well, you know, I'm used to partying, so I'll be fine. But I didn't really think that the day after I partied, I could lie on the sofa and watch Netflix, and there was an end to it. And it was a choice to an extent. Obviously, work is work, but there was a choice that you knew that would come to an end. Even if it was like 4 days, you're like, oh, okay, the end is in sight. But with Alfie, you know, he was up every hour for a year, and it drove me to insanity, but I didn't know when it was going to stop.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't focus on anything, but it was like the rest of the world still expected me to be this highly functional person. And I didn't even know who I was or where I was or what day it was. And the flamingo pink, I think, sums up motherhood perfectly.
I love it. I'll be using that massively. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, just going straight in. Therapy. Do you know what? My childhood was actually really interesting because I grew up on a farm in the north of England. My parents born and bred Northerners, always lived in the same area. They met when they were really young at Young Farmers Club. Young Farmers Club, I think that's what it's called.
I hope
a load of farmers are going to be getting angry, like, that's not what it's called. And then we were on a scholarship, my brother, then me, and my sister actually, to the local boarding school, because they had to let a certain number of working class kids in every year.
Right.
And then it was actually quite a weird childhood. I loved the whole experience. I felt like it was before Harry Potter, actually, but you know, it did feel like suddenly you're going into this completely wild experience. But what it meant is that I never quite felt good enough, because I was suddenly too posh for home, and a lot of the things I was told that at school were normal, I was told at home weren't normal.
Yeah.
But then I wasn't posh enough for school either, so I kind of sat in between these two worlds where I felt like I had to try really hard to be appreciated or to be loved. And that was everything from, you know, I was born a Geordie, and then I faked a posh accent, which is now the way I speak. And then I remember at school we were taught to call any male adult sir, and then I'd go home and go to the co-op and I'd be like, thank you, sir. And my mum and dad would be like, you're so embarrassing, man, what are you doing? So I think all in all, it was really happy, and I feel really lucky for the experience. But I've always had this sort of insecurity that I'm not enough, and I've always had it's taken me a long time, probably till the point that I'm in my 30s, to realise that actually you don't have to work really, really hard for people to like you.
Yeah, but I think that is such a learning curve, though. I think we're constantly like trying to be accepted, and I think that there's just so many different layers. And I think especially being a woman as well, we're told how to be. Yeah,
and I think for me, like, accents are such a big thing, because we kind of assume so much about someone from an accent. And so I always felt at school, I was like the Geordie girl, and it'd be like, go on, say something. And then at home, I was like the posh girl, and I felt like both times that kind of misrepresented who I was, or I was insecure about not being like everyone else in both of those environments. And even going through life, people make so many assumptions about the way you talk, and I think it's taken me so long to not feel like I have to change my accent in almost like a chameleon in certain situations. And I'm sure if I ask most people, they're going to assume that I was kind of brought up in this very like well-to-do London sort of environment.
Well, I guess especially because I'm made in Chelsea, so people would just
even when I did Made in Chelsea and I told my dad, he was like, do they need Geordie Jeff on? Like, no, Dad.
Did you ever look to the future and think about having your own kids, being a mum?
Do you know what? It's really interesting because I'd say when I was a teenager, I'd always say things like, when I'm married and have children, and probably even in my early 20s, I remember being at uni saying, I'm going to get engaged at 24 and married at 26, and then I'll have my first baby by 28. And obviously that time came and went. And I remember breaking up with my last boyfriend at 27. And at the time, it felt like the end of the world because I was like, I'm so old now. I can't believe I'm going to have to start again and I'm so behind. And then I was single for 6 years and it was the best 6 years ever. I feel like I was living my Carrie Bradshaw life, traveling the world and going out for dinner all the time with friends. And that's when I started to think, hang on, I actually really don't want marriage and I can't see myself with children. And I used to always say, I'm not maternal. Oh, I'm not maternal. I don't want children.
Right.
And it's funny how you like form these limiting beliefs about yourself, isn't it? Because I was like adamant, no, I'm not going to have children and I'm not maternal and that's not who I am. And by the way, I do think that's a perfectly valid life choice to be child-free. But now it's so weird because the moment Alf came along, it's like I was almost like made to be a mum. Like I felt so maternal. And I wouldn't say I'm necessarily like the best that I'm like, oh, goody, a children's party. Like my mother-in-law, she loves it. Like any children's party, she's like, can I come? And I wish I was like that. That's not me. But I feel very like connected and in tune with my children and with their needs. And I kind of surprised myself. But I think it was also hard because I never envisioned my life as having children, that it almost like changed overnight.
Yeah. So when you met Tommy, was that the start of you kind of going, oh, maybe that children would be a part of my future?
Do you know what? It's weird because I remember saying to him, because he really wanted kids, not like straight away, but he always said he really wanted kids. And I remember saying to him like, oh, I just can't guarantee that I want that. Like maybe I'm not the right person for you because I'd hate for you to date me and kind of hope that we might have kids and I'd never give it to you.
Which I think so many people do. Like they meet people who are like, nah, don't want kids, and then expecting them to change.
Yeah, and I also think, which is really embarrassing for me to say now, I'd got into my head that I hated children.
Right.
So I was like, I don't even like children, which I'm so embarrassed to say it now because now I think the children are the most like magical little things in the world. But I was just like, oh, yeah, no, I hate children. I hate children. I don't know if I could give it to you. But weirdly, I look back and I'd sent a friend a picture of Tommy with a kid that he must have sent me. And I was like, oh, look, he loves children. So I don't know what was going on in my mind and how much maybe subconsciously. But I remember that when I did find out that we got pregnant, which was like very fresh into lockdown, it felt like sort of fate. I'm a big believer in fate. And I was like, okay, I've met this guy. We'd only been together 3 months at the time. So it definitely wasn't planned or on the cards. And it was his reaction that confirmed like, okay, this is a good thing. He was so excited. And I was like, I remember saying to my friend, but I'm so young. She was like, Ashley, you're 34 years old.
Ouch!
How dare you? But it just felt right. But I think it made it scary because when things were hard in my own struggles with becoming a mum, it wasn't ever like, well, this is what I wanted. It was like, oh, maybe I have made the wrong decision because I didn't even want this. But I also love my child so much, and I felt like I was kind of in this weird, like, sort of like, what have I done? I'm trapped.
I had those thoughts, and I did want to be a mum. You know, I in my mind, I saw kids in my future always. And then that first 3 weeks of having Buzz, I was just like, what have I done? Like, and I think it is such an overwhelming change. No matter what you think, you know, in terms of whether you want children or not, I think when we see people with newborns, generally, it's a very warped perception of what that is, what that experience is like, because you get to hold the baby for a little while. Usually they're quiet or just looking cute, and then you get to hand them back and it's all nice and peaceful. Where actually, when you are the parent, it's constant. And that is such a massive change.
Do you know what? I had that newborn bubble with Alf. I was on cloud 9. I was like, I can't believe I never wanted this. Like, let's have 10 children. Let's have 30. Like, this is the best thing ever. And lots of my friends who had babies really struggled with those like first few months. And what I found hard is my struggles came at 4, 5, 6 months up until a year. And by that point, I think a lot of people have stopped asking because they're just fine.
Yeah.
And I would say things, like, oh, he doesn't see it, but it's all worth it. It's so worth it, guys. Like, mums are so negative. Honestly, it's amazing. And then I was suddenly like, oh, hang on a minute. I'm actually really tired. I think it, when the adrenaline died down and the excitement and probably like everyone around being around. And suddenly I was like, oh, this is my life now. And I'm actually really tired and I live really far away suddenly from everyone. And that was when I started to really struggle. But everybody assumed that I was fine because I'd already said I was fine.
Yeah.
And I think as well, I was lucky to breastfeed, but I found it like, it sounds horrible, but it was almost like, well, I didn't have any freedom, but everybody else that had children around the same time as me, it felt like their lives had gone back to a bit more of normality. Their babies were sleeping in the next room and they were on the bottle. And by the way, I know it's never this black and white. Like, nobody has it easy, no matter what way you do things. But I was like, Alf was still in my bed. He was still waking up every hour. He was still like refusing to take a bottle. And I just felt like, what am I doing wrong? And it was like I needed a break, but I couldn't get a break.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think.
And there's the saying, this too shall pass. But when you've been woken every hour for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, that is a lot. That's a long time to wait for that phase to pass.
Alf is 2.5, and it's only just in the last 2 weeks that he started sleeping past 5. It's honestly been a lot. But amazingly, all we had to do is ban the iPad. Who knew?
Really?
That whole time. I know it doesn't work for everyone because
Yeah.
I've got a friend whose son still wakes up a lot and he's 4 now. But yeah, we just banned the iPad and now he gets up at 7.
So was he waking up at 5 and you're kind of like, have the iPad? You can stay next to it.
But it wasn't even.
We went there.
3, 4. And it was kind of like if you could buy yourself an extra half an hour for your sanity. And then obviously we had Ada.
Yeah.
So I think the iPad sort of just crept in.
Yeah.
Without us really like taking a step back to be like, maybe he doesn't need the iPad.
Yeah. Finding out you were pregnant, did you have any symptoms?
Do you know what? It's so interesting. So Lucy Meck had just recently been pregnant. So I think she's 9 months ahead of me with Roman. And I remember her saying that she knew she was pregnant because her boobs hurt.
Right.
So straight away, I was like, my boobs hurt. Oh no. So I messaged Lucy being like, Lucy, my boobs hurt. And she was like, you're pregnant. And I was like, don't say that. And she was like, you're pregnant. So that was the symptom that I had. And actually my boobs hurt the first time round. So I remember having to sleep in a bra. Because
really?
Anyone luckily it was lockdown, so no one came close to you apart from your partner. But like, it was honestly, I've never experienced boob pain like it. And that, the hunger, that's what I got. I got really nauseous if I was hungry. But other than that, I didn't really have many symptoms until I got to 27 weeks pregnant. And then I had the worst pelvic girdle pain to the point that like Tommy would basically have to help me walk.
Really?
I remember at one point we thought, am I going to have to get a wheelchair because I couldn't do stairs. It was really, really debilitating. And that was probably like the worst symptom towards the end of my pregnancy. But amazingly, I didn't get it this time round.
Amazing. And how did you feel heading towards the birth? Like, did you? I watched One Born Every Minute non-stop to kind of see. I was obsessed with it anyway.
My mother-in-law kept telling me to watch that, but I was like, no, I can't. Weirdly, I was really looking forward to it, but I didn't want to hear anyone's stories.
Yeah.
I did hypnobirthing. I was like I mentioned earlier, I said, I've run marathons. I know how to push myself through pain. I'll be fine. I'm really looking forward to it. I trust my body. I did everything right in terms of, tick, tick, tick. I've done all of these things. And I remember even when my contractions started happening, I was like, this is it. I'm going to discover what childbirth is like. I was really excited because I felt like as well, like nobody really talks about it. Everyone talks about it, but you don't listen.
But also if you're not in that place to actually, if you're not, it's uninteresting until you're in it.
Do you know what? I was really looking forward to finding out what happens after, because you always would hear like, oh, the baby was born here, mother and baby doing well. And I remember thinking, how could mother be doing well? She's just pushed a baby out of her vagina or had been cut open. Like, how could she be doing well? I want to know, like, what's her genitalia doing? Because I need to know these questions. So I remember thinking like, oh, well, I'm going to know now.
Were you nervous at all? Were you just like, no, I've got this?
I was nervous because of lockdown.
Yeah.
So Alf was born January 9th, but my due date was January 3rd. And I think I'm right in saying that January 2nd or 3rd was when they locked us back down again in London. And then the website crashed. So we didn't know what the rules were with hospital. And I was terrified because at that point it was partners were only allowed in for active labour.
Yeah.
And that I remember saying to Tommy, like, I will give birth in the car park if I have to. Like, I'm not being separated from you. So that was really, really nerve-wracking. But the actual birth, I'd say I was excited for.
Yeah. And how was it? Like when things started, how did you know?
Do you know what? It was kind of at first what I expected. The sort of like, I remember bouncing on the birth ball and timing it. And it was obviously painful, like a sort of strong period pain. But I was like, okay, we're calling them surges and it's all going to be okay. And I remember it started at 7:30 and I messaged my midwife about like 11 p.m, I think. And then at 4 a.m, I ended up going into hospital because they were like quite regular at that point. And weirdly, that was when it all changed. And it wasn't the contractions that were painful anymore. It was like this constant agony. Like I can't describe the pain because, you know, people say, take snacks, take an iPad. There's loads of time between each contraction. And I felt so... I was just in pain. I was in pain like the whole time. And that's, I think, when I started to be like, wow, this is not like a marathon for me.
Yeah.
This isn't good.
What was causing that constant pain?
So he was a really big baby. He ended up being 9.5 pounds, but also because I had such severe pelvic girdle pain, my pelvis was already really inflamed.
Yeah.
So I think because he had to turn slightly and then he, I think, got stuck. Do you know what? I'm still not entirely sure what went wrong in my birth. I've had a birth debrief and I was really hoping, so anyone can have a birth debrief. I was really hoping for like answers, even something like really practical, because basically they didn't give me pain relief despite me begging, and it went on for 18 hours. And I genuinely thought I was going to die and something didn't feel right. And they just never quite gave me a reason as to why they didn't give me pain relief. And they said in the birth notes I was doing fine. So it was almost harder to get the birth notes because I thought it would give me answers, but actually it made me feel even more confused. I said to Tommy, were you under any doubt as to the fact that I was in pain, or did I maybe not get my words out properly? He was like, no, like we both, like we said you wanted pain relief. So it was before the Ockenden report, so I don't know how much targets were a part of that.
Right.
And he came out, obviously a very big baby. He was very blue. Luckily, like, thank God, he was fine in the end. But then they also stitched me up incorrectly. So basically, for like a few months after having Alfie, I kept having like what they call fecal incontinence. So normal incontinence, obviously, was wee, fecal incontinence.
Yeah.
Poo. And I thought it was like a normal part of childbirth recovery because, again, like I hadn't really heard much about it. And I feel like all the courses, it gets you up to birth. And we were still in lockdown, so we were allowed out for a walk, and we kept going to the park, and it kept happening. And I remember saying to Tommy, like, I'm disgusting. Or like, I was so worried, even like quite often there's like photographers around the park. And I was like, imagine if I get photographed. And I just got so scared to go out and about. And I felt like my body was broken. And what really annoyed me was like all the conversation was around like your weight or baby weight or how you looked, or, oh, you have lost baby weight or you haven't lost baby weight, or, you know, whatever. And I remember thinking like, I don't care about that. I just want my body to work. I felt like I'd been like just broken, and nobody was like, it was like, oh, well, you might be shitting yourself, but at least you've lost a baby weight. And I was like,
Yay.
yeah. So I think that's when I realised how like superficial the conversation is around
I don't think when it
childbirth.
comes to stitches, because I know that I have Googled every time how to take care of my downstairs, like how to take care of that area afterwards. And every time it's been different, and I forget every time. I don't understand how there isn't like a standard, this is how you sort of bathe and clean and what you should be doing with it.
Yeah, because it is a really scary place to have stitches because you can't see them. And obviously you don't really want to like touch around because in case you hurt yourself. And it's weird because you become almost like afraid of your body.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like your body, and especially at first because everything's so swollen. And I can remember the health visitor, the midwife, Tom, anyone who would look, I was kind of like, can you, because I'm in so much pain, can you just look and see if that's like what it looks like? Because I don't know if I should be feeling how I'm feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there was no like 6-week check. So in my mind, postnatal recovery was you have your baby, 6 weeks later, you have a check, they tell you everything's fine, then you go back to sex, go back to exercise, go back to normal. And that was it. You were recovered. And I didn't ever imagine like how little care there is after. Like even on the 6-week check, it was like, I was like, sorry, can you check my stitches? And they looked at me like I was like this weirdo. And I was like, no, because I was like, I just want to know if they're healed. And it was actually months later when, you know, I went back to hospital about the fecal incontinence that they were like, oh, we missed, basically it was meant to be stitched by a surgeon. It was meant to be front to back, but they only actually stitched the front. So that was why I had so many issues.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So luckily, the good thing about that was that for my second birth, I was recommended medically to have a C-section. So it was a completely different experience.
So did you have to get stitched later on then?
No. And so basically, because at the time when we were trying to figure out, I basically became so afraid of anyone being around there because I had like so much pain, which I later found out is something called vaginismus. Meghan Trainor came out recently and said she had it, and tabloids were like, said what they said. But yeah, so vaginismus is when a woman has any form of trauma. So in my case, childbirth, you hold on to a lot of stress in your vaginal muscles. So anything like from, you know, a tampon, I wouldn't have been able to use a tampon. Like it was so painful. So I thought it must have been because I was like the stitches hadn't healed properly, or, you know, there was something wrong. And I knew I needed to go for a smear test because I kept getting reminded. And it sounds awful, but I was like, I can't put myself back in that environment. I don't want to like lie down with my legs open in a professional space.
Yeah.
So eventually I went to go see a gynecologist that somebody recommended me, and it was private and it was away from like a hospital setting, because I thought like, if I don't have a smear test, I could die. Like I need to do this.
Yeah.
And I obviously didn't want to leave Alf without mum just because I was too scared to have a smear. And that was when he said, no, the stitches are fine. But then I was like, okay, but then what? Because I have this pain and, you know, I can't have sex. I can't use tampons. I feel like I can't function. Like this whole area of my body does not work anymore. And then, it was a pelvic health physio that said it's vaginismus, and it's actually really easy to treat. It's like a sort of massage there. And it just
kind of like letting everything
completely loosens the muscles, and then it's fine. But that took private healthcare and a lot of like me being like, no, this isn't right. Because even the gynecologist was like, no, it's just in your head. It's like, you know, it's your stitches are fine, it's just in your head. And I was like, but how do I get it out of my head then? So basically I don't know yet what I will have to do from my first birth, because I had prolapse as well. It's called rectocele. So obviously I was stitched up incorrectly and then had prolapse. But because I then got pregnant with Ada, which was very planned and very wanted, I thought I'd just throw myself into it. But they don't do any treatment, because obviously then you're about to have a baby loaded onto your pelvic floor all over again. And obviously you have to do birth again. So now I have to wait till she's 6 months old, and then I can start to look at how we can fix the first birth.
Mate, that's a lot.
But it's a lot. But do you know what I found? That like knowledge is power. The moment I was told vaginismus,
because otherwise
easy to
you've
treat.
got people telling you it's in your head.
Yeah. And even if it is in your head, like how do you get it out of your head? And I feel like, you know, we have children and it's like we're almost like we're left.
Yeah.
And I feel fortunate that I was in a position to be able to pay for the gynecologist and then be able to pay for pelvic health physio, but it shouldn't be a privilege.
No.
In the same way that, you know, whenever I've had any other operation, I've had aftercare. And I don't understand why they leave us. So many women I speak to say, yeah, I think I've got a prolapse, but I was told it's not possible. And it's like, why are we letting women down?
Yeah. And the knock-on effect that has physically, emotionally, like it impacts everything.
Yeah, 100%. And also we have this sort of attitude of like, shh, you'll scare pregnant people. Like, don't talk about it. And I by the way, I could not agree more. Like the one thing I hated about my pregnancy was everyone coming with their negative stories. But there has to be a way that we can allow people to have conversations to whoever needs it so that we can change the system, because that's going to help everyone.
Because otherwise you will feel isolated if that's happening to you and you've not heard of it anywhere. Can you remember meeting Alfie for the first time?
Yeah.
How was that?
Controversially.
It's okay.
Cause everybody always says like, just wait until you see their faces, like it's so worth it. And that's kind of what got me through this horrific birth. And I just wanted him to be okay, because you think, you know, when his heart dropped and everything else, I was thinking, oh my God, I just want him to be okay. The moment I knew he was fine, I looked at his face and I was like, I just want to go home and see my dog. He doesn't, like, I was like, what? He was like really purple, really bruised, really swollen. I just remember thinking like, oh, it's not what I can't describe it now, but I just didn't feel any form of attachment. Huge relief that he was okay. But I remember saying to Tommy, bear in mind we were kicked out of the hospital after 5 hours. So I remember being on the way home and saying to Tommy, do you love him? Like, yeah, of course. Do you? No, like, yeah, of course. And I was like, oh. I was like, I feel like we're taking like a stranger home and he just lives with us now. And I remember bringing him into the house and I was like, hope you like it. Like, this is where you live. And it was so weird. Yeah. Because I just didn't feel that. I was more excited to see my dog.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, a few days in, breastfeeding him, I remember the whole thing felt surreal. Like, I couldn't believe he was here. I was so relieved he was healthy. But I just didn't feel that love. And it grew and grew and grew. And I think by day 3, I was like, okay, like, you know, the milk came in and I'd like stare down at him and I'd lie awake and just like be staring at him. But it wasn't that love at first sight.
It carries so much expectation, I think, that moment. And when we can kind of get away from that Hollywood feeling of life falls into place. And for some people it will, but for others it's so complex, and it is something that actually over time will seep in.
And I think a lot of it will depend on your birth and that experience as well, because it's kind of not surprising that I went through. It's interesting because I'd say that Alfie's birth was one of the worst days of my life. Ada's birth, one of the best days of my life. Of course, I love both kids like eternally, but I had that love at first sight experience with Ada.
Yeah.
I didn't have it with Alf, and I'm sure that the birth and the whole day around it, and not maybe because it was my second, I don't know, but they were just completely different emotions.
And it's not surprising then that you also wanted to see your dog, when your dog is something that gives you comfort.
Yeah, he was like my best friend. So yeah, I just remember thinking like, I just want to see Snoop.
Gosh. How was the first little bit with Alfie at home? Because obviously you had it was lockdown, so it was just you guys.
So it was lovely. I'll say, yeah, the first, I'd say 4 months in my little pink flat in London, it was really nice. I think because I surprised myself at how instinctive I felt with motherhood, that I was like, oh, maybe I am maternal. And, you know, it was hard. Like, I missed getting to introduce him to my parents or getting to introduce him to Tommy's parents or friends or anyone. But it was also quite special that I think because we'd been in lockdown for so long, it kind of felt like this new, beautiful, positive addition to what was quite like a scary, frightening time.
Yeah.
So for the most part, I'd say apart from the physical recovery, it was really good.
And was breastfeeding something that you wanted to do from the start?
Yeah, so I'd heard that breastfeeding was hard. So I actually had a lactation kind of consultant come a few days in because I just couldn't like figure it out. And actually I didn't know if I'd be able to breastfeed on both boobs because I had a really big lump removed when I was 15 and they had to take my nipple off and put it back on. So I didn't know if I would be able to breastfeed on that side or not, and I could. And I'd say actually like breastfeeding for me both times has been pretty smooth sailing. And I know it's not like that because my sister had the total opposite experience. But yeah, no, that from breastfeeding I think was really good. And even though he didn't sleep, it didn't bother me at the beginning.
Yeah. And then going again and having Ada, was that because the first birth had been so traumatic? Like, was it a case of just diving in and just doing it, or was it something that you had to really get yourself prepared for?
So I think I only realised how traumatised I was from Alf's birth fully when I had Ada, because the thought of giving birth again, every time I talked about the birth, I'd cry. Every time I thought of my birth with Alfie, I cried. I did the birth debrief. And like I said, I was really hoping for answers and to be told you were coping fine. It was awful. And I was recommended doing, what's it called? The tapping thing, ESMR?
Yeah. EDMR?
EDMR?
Something like that.
I probably got the order wrong, but you can't do that when you're pregnant. And so from my birth debrief, the really good thing, the lady who did it was amazing. And she just said, look, medically, we would encourage you to have a C-section anyway, but I wanted one. I was like, I can't experience that again. I can't risk experiencing that again. And I wanted it to feel like a completely new and different experience.
Knowing that that wasn't going to happen again, like absolutely, because you were going to have an elective C-section, did that mean that you could enjoy the pregnancy more as well?
Yeah, I actually found myself looking forward to the birth again. But interestingly, everything I loved about my first pregnancy, I hated about my second.
Oh, really?
So,
like what?
My first trimester, I was so sick with Ada. I wasn't really sick with Alf. I was really sick. But I was thinking, second trimester, it's the best I've ever felt in my life. Like my second trimester with Alf, I felt like Mother Earth had like I just like floating around, like animals everywhere. And I just felt amazing. I felt beautiful. And my second trimester came along. Alf was getting up at 3 a.m. continuously. And I just felt disgusting and tired. And I wasn't enjoying the pregnancy at all, to the point that I was like, oh no, what am I doing? Why am I doing this again? What have we done? And then my third trimester, which with Alf I couldn't move because pelvic girdle pain, was actually my favourite. I had so much energy. I felt amazing. And then the birth was amazing. It was everything I hoped it would be. And it's interesting because I always hear these conversations around cesareans versus vaginal births, and, you know, people feeling robbed or judgment around the type of birth. And I've never felt like I didn't have a proper birth with Ada. And actually, I feel like it gave me the gift of a positive story. And I know it's not the same for everyone and it's very personal, but my recovery has been much more. It almost felt like when you have an operation, it was much more of a straightforward recovery. Like, you know, you can see your stitches, you kind of know when it's going to recover and what you're allowed to do.
I feel like they give you much more information when you're recovering from a C-section. Like if I think about my sister, like we knew how to treat her scar. We knew what to do with that. Whereas when it's a vaginal birth, I don't feel like there's the same aftercare.
Yeah, but I would still say the aftercare is poor in terms of like there's still no real guidance on things like going back to exercise, what you're allowed to do, lifting.
So you've got to seek it out.
So I use the same pelvic health physiotherapist again, and private again, but so I've had some knowledge, but I've paid for that knowledge, and I don't understand why it feels like they're letting so many women down in that sort of postnatal recovery.
Yeah.
But if I could relive that day every day, I would. And Alf was a big part of it because he came in the afternoon, and seeing his face and getting to meet Ada. And yeah, the whole day I feel like it was very healing because it allowed me to have that positive experience and also be like, wow, that first experience was as bad as I thought it was.
Can you remember saying goodbye to Alfie before going to the hospital?
That was one of the most emotional moments. And it's weird, isn't it? Because it's like next time you see them, they obviously are your baby, but they seem so big.
Yeah.
And I remember before we actually stayed in a hotel the night before to have like a little date before the C-section, because it's amazing, because obviously the first time round, I think Alf was about 2 weeks late. So every day I was waking up like, is it going to be today? Is it going to be today? Where it was this most surreal experience, like going on a date and then being like, oh, it's tomorrow, and knowing the exact time, and it just completely worlds apart in terms of experiences. But I remember just thinking, I don't want to leave you, because when I leave you, when I see you again, you're not going to be my tiniest baby.
Yeah, and it changes, like that's like dynamic. Everything about it, life changes.
Yeah, and I have to say, that was the hardest part about the C-section recovery, because obviously you're not allowed to lift, and I couldn't really even have him sat on me, because obviously I had the C-section scar. So of all of the recovery, I'd say that part was the hardest, of having to be really strict, because even right up to the birth, I was holding him, and you know how they say like stop holding them towards the end because they need to get used to it. I just couldn't.
Oh,
so yeah, not being able to like hug him properly was the hardest.
How did you prepare him for being a big brother?
We talked about him having a sister a lot. We talked about babies a lot. We had books about babies, but he was so young, he didn't really get it. And actually, you know, they say make sure the baby gives them a present.
Yeah.
So he loves baby dolls. So we got him like this little pram and a new baby. So when we'd said, oh, we're going to meet your new baby sister, he came into the room and there was obviously the actual baby in the bed next to me, because they say like you shouldn't hold them or whatever. Yeah. But then we put the baby and the pram on the other side, and he got so excited. I think he thought his baby sister was the doll. So he was like, amazing. And then when we had to be like, no, that's your baby sister. And I'd say he's taken his time. You know, it's such a big change, but now we're in this like amazing phase where she's 4 months and he just loves her. Like every day he's like, Ada, hello Ada watching you. And it's just been so joyful. I think from the moment she was born, yes, there's been challenges, but going from 0 to 1 was 10,000 times harder than going from 1 to 2, and it just feels like she was the missing piece for all of us. It's been really nice.
How has motherhood impacted you in general?
I mean, massively, for good and bad, but I think it's definitely made me a much more empathetic person. I cringe at some of the things I used to say. You know, even I have one really good friend who is a mum of 2, and I used to turn up to her house when we go for dinner and I'd be like, oh, I'm so tired. And now I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry. You must have thought I was so annoying. She was like, no, it was actually nice, because, you know, because I never asked about her kids. I just didn't see them as, I don't know, I just like my friend. And now I was like, I'm so sorry, I never asked. And she was like, yeah, but do you know what? I actually loved that, because at the time she felt she was going through this thing where people just saw her as a mum. Yeah. She was like, and you didn't see me as a mum. Yeah. So it made me feel a little bit better. But yeah, I just think it's made me much more understanding and much more patient, and actually it's made me feel like I'm really good at something. I think you know, we touched earlier on like in my childhood feeling like I was never quite good enough, and this has been the first thing where I'm like, I'm a really good mum. And I might not always get everything right, but that I don't mind. Like I'm learning on the job, but my heart and my love and the sacrifice I feel like I make, sometimes I get that balance wrong. I think that I sacrifice even myself for them, and I'm trying this time to be a little bit better with that and to future-proof my feelings. Like I need to get her on a bottle, because I know that further down the line I might really depend on that. But I feel like a really good mum, and I wish more people had the courage to say that. Like, I'm really good at this.
Oh my gosh, that debate that you had. And what I love, Ashley, is the fact that you champion people, and you do it in such an eloquent way.
Just like
great.
You.
But like the debates that you have, they blow my mind. And the way that you stay so cool and collected when someone is talking to you about traveling with children and what to do with it. Like the lady you were talking to actually said, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is someone who has no idea what it's like.
But she's a mother.
Oh my God.
And this is the problem that I think people forget the struggles, because everyone has this rose-tinted vision of newborns and having children, and it's that idea of enjoy every moment, it goes so quickly, and of course it goes quickly, but telling someone that's struggling, that's going through this match sense, who's, you know, lost their flamingo pink, and telling them to enjoy it, it's really, I get it, especially now that I'm out the other side of it and knowing how quickly it goes. But I couldn't wait for that moment to go. Like, all I wanted to do was be able to sleep. So someone telling me, like, enjoy every moment, I could be like, I'll enjoy it when they sleep. And I think, you know, that kind of attitude sums it up perfectly. The fact we have to debate whether children should be allowed in public spaces. And I'm embarrassed of who I was before, but it's interesting, like, how has society become so anti-child that, like, where did I get that from? Because I'd never really been around children, but it embarrasses me that I was a feminist who championed women that had such a weird stigma against mums and against children. And now I'm really proud to know that I will always be the person that if I see a child on a plane that's upset, I will go and try and help.
Absolutely. Totally different. And you know the impact that will have on that person. I can remember watching on This Morning, people like debating about, and this was 9 years ago, about children being on flights. And I was about to get on a flight to Australia with a 10-and-a-half-month-old. And I just got on this flight and I just felt like every single person was against me before they'd done anything. They hadn't done a single thing, but because I had seen people debating it, I just assumed that everyone on there was against me. And I spent the first part of the flight trying to get Buzz to sleep, to settle, to not make any noise so we didn't, impact anyone else's journey. And I can remember I got to the point where I cried. And it was only when I cried that other people came over and, just on the queue to the toilet or whatever later on, they'd be like, you're doing such a good job. Like, we've been there. That it kind of dissipates all of that other nonsense that you put on a situation without actually, it's just, it's what you carry because of those types of people who vocalize those crazy opinions.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I feel like people forget that a parent's job is to help regulate their children.
Yeah.
And so if that parent is stressed because people make stupid comments or judgments or tucks or, whatever it might be, that once that parent is upset and stressed, they're not going to be able to do the job of calming down their child either. And, I had it the other day with Ada on the tube and she was a bit upset and these two Spanish ladies just came and took her off me and they were like bobbing up and down. And, I know some people might not like that. Like they might be like, give me my child, but I loved it. And it just bought me that little bit of time to find my composure. And I love getting, her, I don't know, it felt like a real sisterhood. And I was like, how nice would that be if we could like instill a little bit of that back into society somehow?
Because years ago it would have been a community raising a child, and now it's very singular. You are in charge of your baby, and actually if everyone came together it would be different.
And I think that across the board, if we could treat pregnant people better so that we're not giving them horror stories, but we're kind of, supporting them, asking them if they want help. Like, it blows my mind that we kind of expected to work up until the point that we've got an entire human inside of us. And then I always think it's funny as well that when you're a new mum, you don't necessarily get to skip the queues, or you don't necessarily get like to sit down. People don't really like think of you, and you're like, I've not slept for 10 days and I'm still bleeding and my bladder is actually really bad. But I think, if more people kind of had that understanding, and even around childbirth, like, it blows my mind that we do this amazing thing and nobody really quite appreciates it. And instead it's like, are you going to lose the baby weight? Fuck off.
I don't know about you, were you asked in interviews before giving birth about losing the baby weight?
Yeah, and I think this is the problem with bounce back culture. Even just by asking the question, are you going to lose the baby weight? It's like, I don't know, like, ask my genetics, like maybe. But also at the time, I just wanted to survive. And I think, lots of people I know have lost, I hate even the term baby weight, like what is baby weight? But, they've lost weight very quickly and they've actually felt like they've been attacked for not being good role models. But a lot of them are like stressed or even that's just their bodies, and I think we've just got to stop objectifying bodies full stop. Like, some people will, some people won't, but ultimately, like, are they healthy? Are they coping? There should just be so much more of a dialogue there that doesn't include bounce back.
If you could write a letter on motherhood, who would it be to and what would you say?
I think it would be to my younger self, to the me even of a few years ago who said they hated children and shouldn't have children on planes and shouldn't have good childcare because why should we have to pay for it? And I think I'd just, encourage myself to be a bit softer and to include mothers in feminism and just to be a bit of a nicer human, really. Because I think, people deserve a lot of empathy. And, however you look at parents, mothers in particular, whether you want children or not, they are raising the next generation. And I think, that's a huge, a massive role for anyone, raising good sons, raising wise daughters. It's a huge responsibility. And so, I think it should be a bit more of a team effort and be child-free, have children, but treat people with a bit more empathy and kindness.
It goes back to what you said earlier about how if you're stressing out the person that's meant to calm or meant to give that child a service, if you like, that is going to filter through in whatever way.
Do you know what else I would say? The reason that lots of mums only talk about their babies is because they actually have nothing else to say. And I remember I hated that about myself when I had Alf. I remember my friend saying, "How's Alfie?" And I started telling her, and I could see the light just went out. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, she doesn't care. And then she was like, "So what else is new?" And I remember thinking in my brain, think of something else, think of something else, think of something else. And it made me hate myself and it made me hate my life because I was I remember just going, I don't have anything else. And I went away feeling so flat, she's going to think I'm boring. And I wish I'd just known to my 3 years ago self, it's okay if they talk about that because also they have just as much right to talk about that as you have to talk about whatever you talk about. Also,
the flip side of that is that you can be placed in any park with any mum or dad and instantly have hours of chat. I feel like it's a total leveler. I don't care who I'm sitting next to in a baby club. I don't care who I'm sitting next to in the park. You can talk straight away and have deeper conversations with those people than you would in any other situation.
And also, I hated that I only had my child to talk about. But that time, you do get bits of yourself back and you will be able to talk about other things again. And it's okay if for a short period of time you only have your child to talk about because you're so tired that your brain doesn't even work anymore, that, you're not doing all the things that you used to do. And I think that would be something I would include as well.
I'd have literally been I watched a really good episode of Countdown actually on the morning feed. What else is there?
Yeah.
We end each episode of the podcast with you completing 3 sentences. The first one is being a mum means.
Being a mum means... I should have really planned this beforehand.
Nope.
I think being a mum means being thrown into a completely parallel universe where from the outside everything seems the same, but nothing is ever the same. And it's full of the highest of highs and I'm going to say the lowest of lows. Every day is a challenge. You're trying to make a jigsaw piece where you can't find all the pieces, but you need to kind of keep it together every day. But it's, for the most part, life-changing in the most amazing way.
Since having children,
Since having children, I sleep less, but have much more wholesome, joyful days.
And I'm happy when?
I'm happy when I wake up in the morning to the sound of my kids, mainly because now they get up at a more reasonable time and the little laughter usually, "Can we watch The Lion King?" Best way to start the day.
I love that. Ashley, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure.